Welcome back, you filthy exiles. So, as promised, Blazing Salvo. This is going to be the League Starter Guide. Now, how do I know this one works? Well, I played at League Start last league, and that was actually before it was buffed, and it was an incredibly fun skill. Now, I've also got a lot of other players that follow my channel who have also played this on League Start, followed my, guides and content on it, and met the same success. The one thing I will say off the cuff, when you do League Start with this, it does hit a bit of a plateau point at about level 40 to 50, or anywhere up to 55, which is about normal when you get to the sort of campaign area where your skills haven't quite caught up, and you're trying to beat that conflux with gearing, and there's just a bit of a dead drop-off point. Other more sort of volatile skills that do more damage but are less sustainable can get around that, but from a league start, I had no issues with this build. Literally by day 3, I was farming alls down in Delve, or day 3 or 4. So, and I'm nothing special, and I have a full-time job. So if I can do it, anybody else can do it. So anyway, going on from there, what is Blazing Salvo? How does this build work? Or how does at least this skill work, and what's its mechanics? Well, basically, Blazing Salvo uses a few things. Now, I've got my final character from 3.18 sitting here, and I've got a League Start tree that I'll talk through very shortly, and where to get everything and how that POB works, as well as the damage profiles and things like that, defensiveness and everything. We'll talk about all of that in that POB, and then break down the skills. We'll break down the skill tree, we'll break down the gems that you need to use, and everything else in between. But fundamentally, how this build works is we have Blazing Salvo, which, you know, you get pretty early in the piece. I think you get it from Act 1. And then fundamentally, this final tree build, if we want to look at it, we use a leadership's price. We proc brittle, which has been nerfed, and we'll talk about the changes in the patch notes that affect this build in a couple minutes. And then basically you just sort of run around, you cast a shitload of Blazing Salvo balls, and they just absolutely eviscerate things. It's literally a point-and-click build. Now, the way that I build this build, I overcap my resistances so we can get to Rod's Fire early, and in fact, I actually have that activated in the tree to give you spell buffing. But the biggest advantage of Blazing Salvo, in my case as a Delve player, is it's super tanky early on. And it'll get you down in a Delve, it'll get you shitloads of armor, it does use determination. We're going to use Arctic armor since it's been buffed. And all those good things, as well as obviously there are some changes that come from the notes, and we'll talk through those now. So some of the things that do impact this this build, and I'm just adding to this list, is brittle now is not as powerful as what it once was. So that's going to inhibit some of the damage, which I've counted for in the trees that I've put up in both the Endgame tree. I'm not going to put a Mage Blood version tree for this one. I've put an endgame tree that takes that into account, and also I've got a League Starter tree that doesn't even use the leadership's price because we didn't need to. And I'll talk about that as I go through, because this is a League Start sort of guide on how to get Blazing Salvo to work. So the mana reservation mastery point that increases mana reservation efficiency by 15% is no longer in the game, so I've removed that out of the tree altogether. There's a nil impact that sort of indicates that there might be a potential change with focus, but it only says on amulet rolls, or veiled modifiers for amulets. It doesn't say on the actual gloves itself. So this is fine. We should be okay, and we should be able to run around with focus, because we do use focus to prop up our cast speed with this build. This is all about fast cast speed. There's a couple of other changes here. I did retrofit this out of my Crackling Lance tree, because my Crackling Lance tree came from my Blazing Salvo tree. But the buff this league is that there is an increase to the damage for Blazing Salvo. The flat damage of the skills has been increased to compensate for the fact that we can't use Eternal Blessing anymore to basically have a temporary reservation of zealotry going forward. So we do lose a bit of damage out of that, which I've compensated for in the tree and removed all of that sort of impact and everything. So I've accounted for all of that. So there are some changes, and I'll also note, and I'll have this in the final notes, that Poacher's Mark has also copped a bit of a slap, or Sniper's Mark used to be called Poacher's Mark. That's how old I am. Sniper's Mark has copped a bit of a slap as well. And so there is a decrease to Sniper's Mark as well. But we'll see when the new patch comes out whether or not using Assassin's Mark or Sniper's Mark is better or worse. It's really just going to depend on you know, the endpoint damage in the tree when we calculate it. Now, some other things with the Crackling Lance tree, because this does use the same ascendancies, some people pointed out that why don't I use Inevitable Judgment in this build? It actually decreases the overall damage. So if we were to take it on the League Start tree that we've got, or we'll talk through shortly, right? So you get quality of life from enemies nearby deal 8% less damage. And that decreases the amount of damage you take. But if you take this, actually proved wrong. If you do take it, it is actually going to increase your damage. The problem is that it decreases your quality of life. Now, you could argue for or against either way. Like, you do have the crit rate to be able to allow for that to actually be very effective. But I'm actually going to leave it to you guys as to what you want to do. Now, I play Delve, so Augury of Penitence makes sense to me because that 8% decrease in elemental damage is actually going to be significant for my character to be able to survive Delve. But if you want to go mapping and just smash bosses early, Inevitable Judgment's fine. And we can also see the League Starter tree gets to about 1 mil, and how this scales is just off, you know, your individual projectiles. Now, 1 mil may not seem like a lot for a League Starter. It actually is a lot for a League Starter, and I think I'm seeing a lot of videos where people are like, your League Starter should have 50 million DPS. No. League Starters do not have 50 million fucking DPS, and if anyone's saying that, they're an idiot. There are some League Starter skills that are better than others, but it's really down to what you want to play. Now, is Blazing Salvo the best League Starter out there? Probably not. Poison Concoction is going to be better. Lightning Strike Raider is going to be better. But the reason why I play Blazing Salvo, and I guess why everybody else wants to play Blazing Salvo, is because it's an interesting skill and it's a lot of fun. And why not play skills that are fun? Like, we're playing video games after all, aren't we? So anyway, that's my little rant about League Starter builds. And the ones that I feature on, some are a little different, some are meta from time to time, but I try and avoid meta where I can, because meta is boring. Meta is not fun. Meta is what everybody else is doing, and meta is also what makes gear cost shitloads as well. So anyway, let's get back into it. So beyond that, basically, from there is a bit of sort of gear tweaking in this endpoint tree, but fundamentally that's Blazing Salvo. And so the more projectiles that we cast, the more damage we do, and we scale that up by each individual projectile and by our cast speed as well. So you want to scale projectiles, cast speed, so on, so on. That's basically the mechanic. But anyway, instead of me talking about this for 20 minutes, let's get into a map. I'll show you what it looks like at endgame. Now, I've had some scrutiny and some of the comments on the video of, oh, why don't I show the, you know, each step of the phase? Well, we're going to play League in like a week, and I only get 1.5 days a week to make videos. So that would mean I would have to spend an entire day leveling up another character, showing each phase. And I'm going to do that anyway with Crackling Lance and show you guys as I go in the new league. But it's really down to, I don't have a team of people. It's just me. It's scarcity of time. And that's just reality. We only have 24 hours to each day. And I'm super keen to get videos out where I've made these builds and put this together and worked the trees, tested the end game, tested everything, got it all working. And I do that so that I can hand that on to you guys. And then basically there is a minimum element to any build, League Start wise or whatnot, where you have to do the research that goes into it. But anyway, I'll try my best to do that going forwards. But for this league guide, I'm going to show you some gameplay of what it looks like at endgame, at least doing T16 maps with the current gearing. And then we're going to wean it down. And the reason why I focus on the end game and the tree that you've got here, as well as the League Start tree leading into that, is because you know this build is going to work. And there's a lot of circumstances where people put out build guides, the build doesn't work, they've theory crafted the tree or whatever, but that you get to end game and you find out that it's absolutely garbaggio, and you've got no, yeah, you're like, well, this was sold to me as a League Start build, but the tree, it doesn't work. You know, or the end game shit, or the build can't survive. It's got high DPS in the tree, but the build actually can't sustain maps or anything like that because it can't take any hits or anything like that. And so that's why I show T16 map gameplay and mapping, because at least then you can see there's something to achieve and you can get there. Even though, you know, as you play from League Start, yes, there's going to be investment at every possible step. That's how League Start works. League Start, there's a huge gray area in creating builds. Some people want content over here. Some people want every step mapped out for them. The reality is, I can only do so much as a YouTube creator to give you enough to let you run with that, and then you have to play the game from that point onwards. It's like anything, like job, study, everything. You've got to put the time and effort into to learn the mechanic. But anyway, let's get into some gameplay. Okay, so we've got just a standard strand map. As always, I always test strand because it's less frustrating for me to do. It's a clean path, and this is just an Elked T16 map. So we'll load this bad boy up, and we'll turn the sound up so we can hear what this sounds like. Let's turn that down so that I can hear myself. Okay. So I had some questions in the comments about its clear speed and everything. Its clear speed's pretty amicable, like it's going to be okay. So first thing you're going to do when you get into a map, pop on your Righteous Fire. In this case, I am using Arctic Armor for the lols, and then pretty much just going to shield charge through and cast. It's a bit of a sound glitch there. And the first thing that you'll notice is it is incredibly tanky. So clear speed wise, is it as fast as other builds? Nope. But it's super strong and really good for Delve because of this. And actually, I just really enjoy the skill. I forgot how much I loved playing this build until I started playing it again. As you can see, just enemies get eviscerated. And obviously this is applying the old brittle. But, you know, the new brittle is not going to change too much. And we'll compensate for that in the tree as well, as best we can. I haven't even finished leveling up Arctic Armor, actually. I'm super keen to see how tanky Arctic Armor is going to make me. And the reason why we use Arctic Armor is when we cast, we do stop. And that's when our Arctic Armor is going to kick in. And I wanted to take advantage of the new changes because, you know, why not? And you will say I do have Defiance Banner up, but that's getting nerfed next league anyway. So, you know, and this was natively tanky before that anyway. Alright, so we get to the bosses. Pretty simple stuff. We hit them with the Poacher's Mark, and then we just blast the bosses. And there we go. Got a Screaming Invitation. That's the gameplay. That's what the build looks like. That's what it looks like at T16. As you level up, of course, it's not going to look like that as we level it up, but I'm going to give you a tree to start with, and then this is the goal. This is what we're going to get to. Anyway, let's get into the League Starter tree. Okay, so we're going to have two trees that I'm going to provide in the description below, and I will just put my face somewhere else. There we go. Cool. So we've got the Endgame tree, which is the one that I've got there, and I won't go into too much detail with this. We get to about 8 mil DPS as I've tuned it down a bit for the changes that we're expecting. But this is not what we're going to focus on. We're going to focus on the League Starter tree. So first of all, you can juice the damage up if you wanted to. You take off Penitence, Judgment. You know, it's going to decrease your survivability, but it's going to increase your damage. So let's just put it there because everybody's going to ask me to do that anyway. So we're not really scaling the matching between strength and intelligence because at League Start, you're less so going to be interested in doing this. You're more so going to be interested in basically just getting to the point where you've got enough damage to sustain, you know, red tier maps. Now, this tree is also scaled. So we go from 35, 55, 75, up to 92. And it actually scales the damage as you go as well. Now, that being said, you know, we are using some uniques in here. And I've had other people comment in my Crackling Lance video as to, you know, where the itemization is going to come from. Well, it's a great question. You know, we don't know what the drop rates are going to be for some of these things, but I can say, like, in the past, these items have been pretty achievable. Like, for fuck's sake, Tabula Rasa, you can just go farm bloody Aqueducts and get the cards and, you know, do it that way if you want. Like, you can get that at Series Foible. Anyway, we'll talk through that very shortly. So, fundamentally, the tree does have an intuitive leap. You can flame me whether or not you think that's relevant. If you don't think it's relevant, well, then you can just click on the 75 tree and it's not there. Now, yeah, that's pretty much where we're at. Like, you know, I've tried to scale this tree as best I could to account for everybody sort of moving through the game. The big focus in the early days is defensiveness, and then you sort of breach up and you pick up your damage up here. But anyway, let's talk about this tree. So, let's just talk about the config first, and then we'll go through the skills, the items, or the items, the skills, and then the tree itself. So, time spent stationary. The reason why I've got this selected is when you cast, as you could see, you do stand still. And because Arctic Armor's new buffs that are coming in are going to react with standing still, you're actually going to get, I think it's like 20% physical and fire damage reduction. So it's going to be pretty significant. Now, power charges and frenzy charges and endurance charges are actually coming off the fact that there's changes to the Lotch, Tony, or Caress unique gloves, which are really basic unique gloves which are going to give you 10 to 15% chance to gain power charges, frenzy charges, or endurance charges on kill. So this won't apply to bosses. So this will be a little less powerful on bosses. And the way that we get around that is we could find something like Ralikash's Impatience, which from what I can see is just when you go stationary, and because we'll be stationary with cast, you'll get basically everything all at once. Every single charge format all at once to the maximum. There'll be your minimum charges while you're not moving. What that basically means is you can pretty much sustain power charges and everything early on, which is going to bolster your damage up. Without these on the tree, you are going to lose damage. Now, if you wanted frenzy charges early on, the best way to do that is also build into this tree, which is a level 1 cold snap on cast and damage taken, which is here, right? Cast and damage taken, cold snap. So that's pretty much the first part of the tree. Now, Onslaught, we've just got it on the boots. You're not going to get a 19 to 20% movement speed roll early on, but you will be able to get a like 12% roll, which will give you Onslaught. The alternative is there's a spare flask slot in here. You could put an Onslaught flask in early on and achieve that. Adrenaline. Now, the old Death's Rush used to give you Onslaught. The new Death's Rush actually gives you Adrenaline. So you gain Adrenaline for 3 seconds on kill. Now, predominantly, this has always been a leveling item in particular because the one advantage was the Onslaught buff early on, but Adrenaline gives you 25% cast speed and it gives you movement speed as well, I'm pretty sure. So we do have that ticked onto the tree. So you get 10% additional physical damage reduction, 100% damage, and 25% cast and movement speed. This is pretty significant. So like this will apply when you're killing stuff. So yes, this will decrease your damage when you're on bosses if you haven't killed stuff. So this will, at the very start when you're leveling, is going to be a little less powerful when you take on bosses, but that's going to scale up as you get focus, as you get the build leveled up and everything else. And you should be able to get if you do the syndicate missions early, you should be able to get the focus craft. So that will give you increased attack speed earlier on. Obviously, it's not in this tree because there's nothing with focus on it, but just something to keep in mind. And you're going to get that on your gloves, by the way. So as soon as you can get focus gloves, you'll be laughing. Flasks are active. Consecrated ground, yes and yes. It's an Inquisitor, so you're always going to be on consecrated ground. We have 10 enemies nearby. That's because we roll Soul of Lunaris, and that gives us a huge damage buff, and you get that as you go through the campaign, so that's really not anything unexpected. Have you been hit recently? Well, this is a pretty tanky character, so yes, you're going to be getting hit pretty recently. Intensity, yes, you're going to have 4, and this is based on the tree. So we get Caster Mastery here, we get an additional +1 to Intensity. And so we run Intensity in our skill gem setup on our Blazing Salvo. Intensity, so intensifies up to 3, +1 equals 4. And then basically you max out Intensity, so you have 4 Intensity. And as you can see, as you get more intense, the longer you're casting, the more damage you're going to do. Now, physical age is depleted. Yes, that's pretty much going to be the case. We're going to be taking a lot of damage, so the shield's going to be depleted all the time. Alternatively, you could just run any old shield or any old spell shield with, spell damage on it and crit and whatever else. Whatever you can get to prop up spell damage, and it's going to amp that damage up anyway. This is just some suggested, unique gear that you can use. You can switch this out for rare gear and everything. This is just a proof of concept to say, hey, this will work early game, and this is what you got to do. At League Start, or sort of a guide, but you don't have to follow this perfectly, and if you'll pick up different gear as you go. So, the ultimate goal is to get you to endgame mapping and progressing through mapping. Is this going to kill Cyrus? Probably not. Though, it probably will get close to. If not, it probably will kill him, but it'll just take longer at the start, which is expected, because if you haven't invested on anything, you don't know, you don't have any damage. So, that's pretty normal. Will it get you through early delve? It'll get you down the early levels of delve, and that's going to be the biggie. You can probably run about 200 to 250 delve with this. And you'll be able to definitely take down early alls. So, and you'll be able to heist, and you'll be able to do syndicate. So, it'll get you through the game. That's what I'm getting at. And that's the whole idea of a League Starter. League Starter is like the first 2-3 days. We never talk about day 5 to day 10 to day 15 when you start getting investment. And that's when everyone goes, oh, well, it's not a League Starter. It's like, that's start a league. Everybody thinks that day 1 you should have 10 million DPS. That's just not how it works with the vast majority of builds. So anyway, going on from there. So nothing else is ticked or adjusted in here. Is the enemy moving? Doesn't really matter, but you know, we got that. Projectile, travel distance, again, doesn't really matter, so just take that out. Is the enemy blinded? Yes, the enemy is blinded. It doesn't give us a buff per se because it doesn't really pick up in the tree, but I've just got this really basic Eclipse Solaris wand that, you know, drops all throughout the start of the game, which gives you 130% increased critical strike chance against blinded enemies, and nearby enemies are blinded, which is pretty significant, and it adds 38 to 70 fire damage, which I'm not sure necessarily adds fire damage to Blazing Salvo, but you definitely get the global crit strike multi. Really good early game item. You could just get a spell, you could just get any old like wand that has similar stats, crit, all that sort of shit, and it'll do the same job, but this is just to get you started. You know, this is just a League Starter, so it's to get it working. Now, is the enemy shocked? No, the enemy's not going to be shocked in this case, though you could apply some shock. You could put on Stormbrand and basically, you know, hit enemies with that if you wanted to. It's entirely up to you. You can do what you want with this. Is the enemy on consecrated ground? Yes, they're going to be on consecrated ground. This is Cyrus damage too. So, you know, if they're standard bosses early up, you're going to fare better. But level 83 bosses and Cyrus damage, so that's 1 million DPS at League Start. Some people will be like, oh, that's pretty bad. It's not. It's really not bad. It's pretty good. Like, if this is what you got by the end of the first day, you're doing okay. Like, I gotta say to you, you're not doing badly at all. Like, you can only go up from this point, and that's the idea of League Start. So anyway, so we'll talk about the gearing next, and then we'll go into the gym setups. Okay, itemization on this one. So Eclipse Solaris, as noted, just really good starting one. It drops throughout the campaign. Obviously, they've adjusted the drop rates, so that could change, but I very highly doubt that this is going to be hard to find. Ghastly Theater, this is just like any old shield that I wanted to throw in here, right? Like, you don't need to run the Ghastly Theater. You could run any other shield you wanted to run. But this is just to sort of get you started or give you an idea of what you can use. The Gull, like, if you can get it, great. Then you get lesser shrine buffs, which are actually going to increase your damage above this. And if you're running early maps with the shrine Atlas points, that's going to make your mapping experience really easy as well. So, you know, there is that. From a damage perspective, this is pretty good for Delve, but as a League Start. But I'll also note, like, if you don't run the Gull, you could run anything else. And if that props your damage or survivability up, then I would say do it. Like, you're only going to get the advantage out of that. Tabula Rasa, because if I put anything else in here aside from Tabula, like, ideally, if you can get an Impulses, or, you know, actually, that would be a Crackling Lance. If you could get anything in here other than Tabula Rasa, you're going to be doing pretty well on the defense side. And anything in particular that can give you a damage increase, then I would definitely advocate for that. The Lochtonial Caress, I'm recommending because of the chance to gain Frenzy Power and Endurance Charges on kill. And that's also getting buffed up in the patch notes, so that's going from 10 to 15 instead of a cap at 10, so that's going to be a much better item. Greaves, literally just any old Greaves, just try and get Onslaught on it or run an Onslaught Flask. Any movement speed's good. At Series Foible, I always put at Series Foible because it deals with early mana reservation issues. So, you know, last league, if anyone who watched my channel followed my Vortex guides, I was using this all the way through into Endgame. I think I was doing like Delve 16 with the bloody at Series Foible because it's just such a good item. It takes away the need to have to balance gearing in your build, and it sorts out the mana problems that you'll have early on. So you don't have to worry about it so much. And there's no anoint on here. So if you wanted to anoint something on here to buff your damage early on, like I think True Seeker or something like that, that increases crit or spell damage or whatever, you can do whatever you want with it. Like, it's entirely up to you. Death Rush, obviously, as noted in the patch notes, this is getting a change to it, so it's going to be Adrenaline. So this is just going to make the builds even better. Now, this item usually drops pretty consistently throughout. It can be a little expensive if you're trying to acquire it early on. But if you're running this as a league starter, even into mapping and beyond the league start, when you start to balance towards leadership's price and everything, this is going to be a really good item to get just to sort of get you that adrenaline stat. And I've been thinking about this more and more, and even in the end game, I'd be running this in end game, honestly. I don't know if this is going to be like, you know, I don't know how this is going to go with this ring. It could drop consistently throughout the game, but adrenaline's a really OP stat. So anyway, we'll see how it goes in the league. At this stage, I've got this in the league starter, just because we don't know what the drop rate's going to be, and it's been pretty consistent league on league that this is just a good league starter ring. So, you know, I've got no other reason to believe that it wouldn't continue to be so. Then I've just got another ring with, you know, Dex, Cast Speed, Max Life, Elemental Resist. You know, honestly, anything that gets close to this or propping up your damage in any way, shape, or form, or survivability is going to do the job. Just an Eternal Life Flask, just a Quicksilver Flask, Granite Flask, and Diamond Flask to deal with crit. Obviously, super important, and you're going to want to get Cast Speed on this. Now, you're not going to get the gain 6 charges or whatever straight up. But realistically, I think you get a max of 3 charges. It's not really going to change the way that this build works. It works pretty much the same. Now, Intuitive Leap, I've already established that, that one's usually in the start of the league, like by the first couple of weeks, about 30-35 chaos, and it does drop relatively consistently, but it may not. And if that's the case, you just need to adjust the tree and literally take it out and then move up 4 points, and that's it. And it's league start, so it's a level 90 tree. You can do that by compensating and pulling points out of somewhere else. That's part of just balancing. But you really need to pay attention to the feel of the build. If it's not working, then you need to adjust. The other thing too is that there is a reliance on the Nadir and the Apex here to buff up your crit. So Nadir and Apex basically drop from the Unbreakable monster, and I think it's, Unbreakable heist encounter boss. And if you're playing any early heist, you can get this pretty quickly. Anyone who is playing heist will get access to this very quickly in the first couple days of league. And you'll do quite well. Like, you'll smash through and yeah, you'll get those drops. And they in past leagues have been very cheap because nobody really plays these intensity builds. And they probably still won't in the grand scheme of things. But basically the impact of the item is that they offset against each other with a result of 20% 20% more crit per level of intensity. So the downside on the Nadir is that spells which have gained intensity recently lose 1 intensity every 0.5 seconds, and that's the opposite effect for the Apex mode Cobalt Gem. So basically, offset it. You can apply both of those in your tree, and you can offset the two, which then results in, instead of just getting the 10% reduction in crit strike chance per intensity and the 30% increased crit strike chance, they offset against each other. So then you get 20% increased crit strike chance per intensity. And because these are relatively easy gems to get and cheap, and when I say easy, you could farm them yourself because you will get unbreakable encounters very early on in Delve. It's the first unique map that generally drops in Delve. It's a big like golem boss in the center of the room. Not Delve, Heist, sorry. Then you could just run this a few times. You could just buy a few of these maps with any chaos that you farmed in the early league, and then you could get this item. And actually, you could take this in the end game because it's a hell of a lot of crit to get your crit up early. But that's pretty much it for the gearing. Now, some people are going to be like, oh, that's a lot of uniques, but these are all pretty much trashable uniques in the first, you're going to be able to get it working, is what I'm getting at. Now, some people will say, oh, a million DPS isn't a lot of DPS to have a league start, rah, 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 rah. So show me the builds where you've got 15 million DPS at league start or 5 million DPS at league start, and show me who's playing those builds too, because I can guarantee you they're not beginner players. And they're super optimized, and there's still going to be unique items or crafting you're going to have to learn. There's just a basic amount of knowledge you need to know for any build that you play. But that being said, this build should get you started. Now, is this an easier build to sort of gear up than others? I would say so. A lot of these items are pretty switchable. So like Death Rush, I would target getting that item. You don't really need the Lochtonials. The Tabula, you're going to go for that anyway. The Gull, you're probably going to go for that anyway. You can switch out with any shield, and you can switch out with any wand. And the gems, you could just have like crit strike chance gems and spell gems and whatever to buff that up. And Intuitive Leap, as I said, you can switch that out and literally just build up there and reallocate 4 points for a little time, and then regret them out and get an Intuitive Leap later on. And then that being said, also, you know, we don't even have a belt on this. We're missing a flask. You could buff the damage up in other areas there as well. So there's room to move is what I'm getting at with this. You can do whatever you want with this tree. This is just a League starter tree because it's not the final tree. The final tree is the second part of this video. So anyway, let's get into the gem setups. Okay, gem setup wise. So pretty much first off, in the second weapon, I've removed all the gems that are no longer going to be applicable in the game. And I haven't even applied the fact that we're going to use Val Haste. And Val Haste you can get from doing Val side areas, so pretty easy stuff. So we're going to use Temper Shield, it's max block build. We are going to use Righteous Fire. The reason why we can use Righteous Fire is because we do overcap fire res early on, and that comes a lot from getting your Prismatic Skin, from getting your Solar Steel, and also getting your Barbarism. All gives you increased fire res, as well as the fire res node down here. So it gets you enough fire res, and with the regeneration of the Inquisitor, you can sustain Righteous Fire early, which, you know, basically means, like, this is similar to running a Righteous Fire character almost in that respect. And so from that, you get an increase to your spell damage. So 39% more spell damage. You also do a lot more damage to enemies around you, with the expense of it costing you a bit of health degen, but in this case, it'll balance out by the time you're level 90. We're going to run Shield Charge with faster attacks and a Molten Shell and cast some damage taken. We just basically want to run around and be unhindered, so that's what we're going to do. In the chest, you're going to run Blazing Salvo, Intensity, Spell Echo, Fire Penetration, Inspiration, and Critical Damage. Now, some people are going to be like, oh, these are 2020. Like, serious? Like, by the time you get to, like, Endgame, yeah, you won't have everything 2020 necessarily, but, you know, you can do that pretty quickly within the first few days, and there's no wall here. This is entirely based on time investment, so I could give you multiple iterations with level 10 gems, and then people will say, oh, you didn't provide level 5 gems or level 15 gems. It's like asking the same question. So 2020, you can get a lot of gem cutters or GCPs down in Delve. They drop pretty consistently. Alternatively, you can do it in Heist. There's, you know, you can trade on PoE Trade website and get GCP. Like, there's tons of ways. There's div cards that give you GCP as you drop. But the goal is to get 20% on your gems, and that's going to give you the damage you need. If you didn't have 20%, you know, yeah, it's going to drop your damage a little bit, but it's not going to be a game changer for you. So that's how it is. And then Assassin's Mark. I've still got Assassin's Mark in this build. You can put in Sniper's Mark, but that's going to be a bit inflated at the moment. And so for now, for the League start, I'm just going to use Assassin's Mark because it's pretty much unhindered by the patch notes. We also have Flame Dash in here. Now, Arcane Surge, the mana that you spend is going to dictate whether or not you can generate Arcane Surge from these. So, yeah, higher level, more the chance Arcane Surge is going to proc. Cold Snap. So later in the bit, when you remove the items that generate power and frenzy charges, you're going to be using Cold Snap, and the reason why is cast from damage taken. When enemies die while they're on top of Cold Snap, you got a 25% chance to gain a Frenzy Charge, which is really good for this build. It means you can generate Frenzy Charges while mapping. It won't help you in bosses, that's true, but it is going to help you get through maps. Now, we use Anger and Determination. Now, Val Haste, if we were using Val Haste, if that's ticked on, you go up to 1.2 million DPS, and we're basically using this as like a temporary fixer because we no longer have Zealotry. It's nowhere near as good, but it does get the job done. Now, Physical Aegis comes from the shield, and Shrines comes from the goal. But that's about it for the gearing. That's about it for the skill setups. As you can see, there's missing areas of skills, which means you could run any other skills that you want to run. You could run any other buffs you want to run. Temporary buffs, you know, you could run, was it Ice Shield? I think it's Frozen Shield, Frost Shield, which I think increases your damage again. There's tons of things. You could run Brands as well to proc elemental, like flammability. You could run a bloody Infernal Cry, and if we run Infernal Cry, then enemies will be covered in ash, and that's going to increase their damage by 200,000. There's a whole heap of different things that you could do to get this started with League Start before you start to sort of level up and change into the final tree iteration. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the skill setups. And so we'll talk about the tree. Okay, so for this build, similar to my Crackling Lance build, I've given you guys multiple iterations of the tree. So to start with, pretty much you're going to be building up from the Inquisitor nodes. Now, you could start down here, and this is going to give you, I guess, more strength and a little bit more mana regeneration. It's entirely up to you as to which way you go. This is balanced towards moving in the final tier of the tree, where you do need that little bit more int to balance it up to match your strength, because that's the way that your sorry, brain completely slipped there. That's the way that your leadership price is going to be able to allow you to have Scorch, Brittle, and Sap. But anyway, it becomes a case-by-case scenario as to how you manage that. So then we build up through the int nodes here. We come down, we pick up Life, we pick up Sanctity, we pick up Righteous Degree to reduce our mana cost, we pick up Glancing Blows, we want to get Tireless, and then we want to come down and pretty much target getting Prismatic Skin pretty quickly and Iron Will, and this is going to increase your spell damage from your strength, and this is going to increase your overall survivability and your overall reses early on by level 35. By level 55, we pick up Soul of Steel, we pick up Bloodless, we get Determination, res decreases. We're going to try and get our Jewel Socket here. We're going to get, any other little pieces here to sort of fill in the gaps. And then we start moving up and we get Mental Rapidity. And this is going to give us our ability to stack an extra level of intensity. And then basically we're going to go from there. So to level 75, and this is by the time you finish the campaign, we're going to get Crackling Speed for the time being, but we won't run that through in full. We'll adjust for that as we go. Actually, we can take that out and we can actually go with this. Level 73. We could even grab Frostwalker or something like that. Really, we could pretty much just go, actually, there we go. I like that more. So that's going to increase our survivability, that's going to increase our damage, it's going to be pretty reasonable. And then up to level 92, then we basically work around and we fix everything up. So, then we're basically looking at picking up these nodes up here, so we get Infused Flesh is a huge defensive layer for this build. Picking up the rest of our crit nodes, our sovereignty. As you can see, we didn't focus on mana reservation early on. We pretty much went and did that last. And we still end up with unreserved mana of 117. We don't have the mastery point ticked in here, so that's not going to impact it. We get our crit up, and we get to a pretty moderate amount of damage, which is going to pretty much do us the world of good as we go through the campaign. Now, if you can get a Dying Sun early, even better. I've got it selected in here. It's going to increase your damage, but if I put it in a League Start guide, then somebody's going to go, well, you can't get a Dying Sun on League Start. Pretty much get a Dying Sun pretty early on. But anyway, yeah, that's pretty much how it works. That's the tree. That's how complicated it is. Now, for Ascendancies, I did switch that to Inevitable Judgment. It's entirely up to you what you want to do. You could go Augury of Penance if you want to increase your survivability, or you could go Inevitable Judgment, which means your crit strikes penetrate 10% of, your crit strikes ignore enemy elemental resistance altogether, so they basically have no impact on you. But the reason why you don't use this with Inevitable Judgment is, actually, I don't think it has an impact with, I'll have to have a look at that. Anyway, it's all good. Anyway, that's pretty much how the tree works. Really simple tree, really easy to build. Now, again, this takes a bit of, it is a little bit more challenging to play this as a League starter, but it is a really good League starter. Last League, I had a lot of fun with this build. And if you watch my live streams or anything like that from last League, it was a really good League starter. I cleared everything in the first 2-3 days. I think I had all my endgame gear by day 7, and I was already farming. I had already killed all 4 Pinnacle bosses, and I had already fully decked out my Atlas by the first week. So, does this build work on League Start? Yes, it does bloody work on League Start. I played it last League on League Start. I got the footage and the proof to back that up. Anyway, let's go into the final endgame tree and I'll show you what you need to do in there. Arguably, you've played for about a week or so and you've gotten all your gear and you're like me and you're like, all right, cool, let's min-max the shit out of this. So the final damage profile on this, where I got it to, was about 7.89 mil. Right, and there's some give and take in this tree. Some things are going to change. There's a bit of balancing that still needs to go into some of these things. Is that a good amount of damage? Well, there's going to be some bloody White Knight that's going to go, no, that's terrible. It's not 50 million DPS. And my response to them would be like, honestly, if you want a build that does 50 million DPS, then I'm not the person to look at for that. I always consider about 5 million DPS a good amount of DPS league on league by the time you get to endgame. And when you benchmark a lot of builds in poe.ninja, that's actually where they sit. The outlier builds that require mirror tier investment, and this is not mirror tier investment, requires that sort of, that's what's required to get to that sort of DPS. And then you have to ask yourself, like, would you rather go for a run at the gym in the night, or would you rather play PoE? So that's where we get with that. But anyway, so by the time you get to endgame, it's relatively the same tree. The biggest thing here, though, is that all of the attribute points are lined up for strength and intelligence. So that's pretty much where you want to go. And this, if you follow this tree exactly after you get your leadership price, respec some points, follow this tree exactly. It's not adversely different to the existing tree that I've got in the league start tree, but as soon as you get your leadership price, get this spec'd in, because that 6% that comes off, or it's actually a little lower, 6.6 million. That 6% that comes off the leadership's price for the brittle is pretty significant. So that's going to give you a huge damage increase. Now, outside of that, actually, we haven't even got power charges maxed in there. If you can get max crit into this, and that's really easy, you basically just switch out one of these flasks for a diamond flask and you get max crit, or close to. So pretty much where you go from there, we're adding in Glorious Vanity, and this is actually going to nullify some of these attribute points so that you can get to your matching. So it is actually important you get here. As soon as you can get an Unnatural Instinct, you want to get this, but you know, this isn't in the league starter, and you're probably not going to get this straight up because this was an expensive item last league, and it always is because it's a really rare item. But that's why this is an endgame tree and not a league starter tree. And then beyond that, we do have Intuitive Leap. We pick up Infused Flesh. So our survivability is pretty good, but it can be better if we switch to the other Kraken Boots, which increases our regen hugely. It just reduces some of our some of our Scorch effect. But this just uses Legacy of Fury as it stands. And yes, there is a Bottle of Faith in there. Yes, there is a Dying Sun. As I noted, this is a endgame tree. Now, there are no cluster jewels in this entire build. And that's by design. That's what makes this a really good league starter, because you don't need to worry about cluster jewel setups. But yeah, pretty much that's it for the entire build. Like, jewels are really easy: resistances, attributes, and life. If you get crit, you could get crit. That'd be even better. But minimal jewel requirements, and yeah, pretty much from a skill front. And there's a build guide up on this. Yes, it uses Awaken Spell Echo and Awaken Fire Pen and all that sort of cool stuff. Itemization, we end up with a Brass Dome, Leadership's Price, Legacy of Fury, but everything else is pretty crafted. Now you say, oh, this is really awesome gear. I crafted a lot of this gear. It was like super easy. Literally, you know, Hunter bases. We can do guides on this stuff anyway as we do the Crackling Lance builds, because it's very similar. But, you know, that's why this is an endgame tree, and that's why there's a separate build guide for this, and why I'm not going to talk to this in huge details in a League Starter video. But anyway, this tree's in the description. This is pretty much your goal tree. This is where you want to get to with the build. And this is compensating for things like Arctic Armor. This is compensating for, you know, there is a little bit of overbuffing with Sniper's Mark in there, but it's only level 15 Sniper's Mark, so the damage is a little less than what you'd expect at a level 20, so that should be fine. It does use Arctic Armor. I've removed things like Defiance Banner out of this tree. I've removed the Mana Reservation, I've removed the Eternal Blessing buffings, and it doesn't take into account that the Blazing Salvo skill itself is actually getting a buff to its underlying damage caps, so it's actually going to be a lot more powerful anyway. So that damage is actually going to go up instead of going down. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the endgame tree. So to wrap up with this one, I'll just quickly switch to... So, yeah, there are people that are going to be like, oh, Blazing Salvo is not a league starter skill. Well, that's bullshit, because I played it last league and it was a fucking great league starter skill. Is it the easiest league starter skill? Not necessarily. It takes a little bit more challenge to play it. It's a lot more fun. It's definitely a lot different. It's not a meta skill by any measure. But it is actually a really good skill. And it is getting a buff this league. It is very strong. And it's pretty good at taking down endgame bosses. And that early league start tree, that is going to give you enough DPS to do pretty much anything. It's going to get you up into red tier maps, you know, by the time that you get to that phase. Now, I am not going to do like a tiered breakdown and re-level a new character or whatever. I just don't have that sort of time. But as it is, that tree is going to get you started. It's going to get you cracking. You will need to adjust things as you go. And just remember, as you play League starters, you need to play to the way that the build feels. So if it's dying a lot, you need to address that. You need to increase your reses. You need to focus on defensive layers, get your infused flesh earlier. There's a whole suite of things that you need to keep in mind when you're doing a build. The other thing too is it is a max block character, so it is a bit safer at the start of League. So you need to have a good shield with block on it. You need to have a lot of armor on that shield if you can get it. If not, if your spell damage is lacking, get a better one. You can upgrade your shield, get a shield with spell damage, get rings that compensate for that. League starters are literally that. They're a guide. They're not a master plan to how a character should run. The endgame tree for this is a master plan. But League starter trees and League starter guides, not so much. Anyway, until next time, hopefully this build helped you out. Hopefully I haven't led anybody astray here. Like, if that was the case, I would have led myself astray last league, and I wouldn't be recommending this to play from League start, because it would have been went into the failed build pile. And also I probably wouldn't have had a heap of people comment on the video saying that they really liked the build and that they had a lot of fun playing it last league. So, you know, there is that too. But anyway, until next time, have a good one, and bye.